Why this supercar made drivers feel invincible. At first, it didn't just feel fast, it felt unbeatable, as if the laws that governed everyone else had quietly stepped aside the moment this car arrived. Drivers didn't talk about acceleration or handling anymore. They talked about invincibility, about a strange belief that nothing on the road could challenge them while they were inside it. To understand how this supercar turned confidence into a feeling of personal immunity, we need to go back to the moment it was conceived, when manufacturers stopped asking how fast a car should be and started asking how powerful it could make the driver feel. This wasn't just an engineering project. It was a psychological one, designed to erase hesitation and replace it with certainty. The car emerged during a peak era of excess, when performance numbers escalated faster than restraint, and when technology was finally capable of hiding danger behind polish. Advanced traction systems, flawless power delivery, and perfectly tuned aerodynamics worked together so seamlessly that effort disappeared almost entirely from the experience. Behind the wheel, everything felt easy. Too easy. The throttle responded like an extension of thought. The steering followed intention rather than input, and the chassis absorbed mistakes with such confidence that drivers began assuming mistakes no longer mattered. The car didn't argue with bad decisions. It corrected them quietly, making every successful recovery feel like proof of skill rather than evidence of intervention. Early test drives were filled with disbelief. Journalists wrote about how fearless the car made them feel, how speed lost its edge, how corners that once demanded respect now felt routine. What they didn't realize was that fear wasn't gone. It had simply been postponed, because this supercar didn't remove limits. It concealed them. Every system was calibrated to protect the driver without being felt, stepping in invisibly, smoothing out aggression, and reinforcing the illusion that control was absolute. The result was intoxicating, because humans are wired to trust experiences that feel consistent, and this car felt consistent right up until the moment it didn't. Confidence grew unnaturally fast. Drivers pushed harder not out of recklessness, but out of reassurance, because the car kept confirming their belief that they were capable of more. Each successful drive rewrote their internal scale of risk, shifting boundaries without ever announcing that anything had changed. This supercar didn't just deliver speed, it delivered certainty. And certainty, when it arrives without effort, becomes the most dangerous performance feature of all, because invincibility is not something a machine should ever teach a human to feel. And that is where the story begins. The illusion held longer than anyone expected, because the car was engineered not just to save drivers from mistakes, but to do it so quietly that those drivers never realized they had been saved at all. Every intervention happened beneath perception, smoothing power delivery, correcting yaw, redistributing torque, and adjusting grip in ways that felt completely natural, as if the driver's instincts had simply improved overnight. This is where the danger deepened, because the car didn't teach limits through resistance. It taught freedom through success. Each time a driver pushed harder and nothing went wrong, confidence compounded, building a mental model where speed no longer felt like risk, but like proof of competence. Corners that once demanded respect became familiar. Acceleration that once raised heart rates became routine. The supercar normalized extremes. What made this especially powerful was consistency. The car behaved the same way every time. Predictable, stable, reassuring. Humans trust consistency instinctively, and this machine delivered it relentlessly, reinforcing belief that whatever the driver attempted would be supported, corrected, and carried safely to the other side. The driver wasn't learning how to manage momentum or weight transfer anymore. They were learning that the car would manage it for them. Manufacturers celebrated this as progress, safer performance, accessible speed, reduced fear. But fear exists for a reason. Fear teaches respect, and respect teaches discipline. This car bypassed both, creating a generation of drivers who felt capable without ever being challenged in a way that builds real skill. They weren't reckless. They were reassured. The first signs appeared quietly in data, not headlines. Insurance models showed unusual patterns, not mechanical failures, not consistent abuse. Instead, rare but severe incidents clustered around moments of total confidence, when drivers pushed hardest because nothing had ever punished them before. The car had been perfect right up until the exact moment perfection ran out. Because even the most advanced systems have thresholds. Grip still ends. Physics still wins. And when that threshold was crossed, the transition was brutal, because drivers had never been trained for the moment when the car stopped helping. They had learned acceleration. They had learned confidence. They had not learned recovery. By the time assistance faded, speed was already too high, inputs too aggressive, and belief too strong to adapt in time. The car had taught them how to feel invincible, but not how to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is what saves you when control is slipping. This supercar didn't fail its drivers by being too fast. It failed them by being too reassuring. Because the most dangerous machines are not the ones that scare you. They are the ones that convince you that fear is no longer necessary. The collapse of that illusion, when it finally came, felt violent not because the car suddenly became uncontrollable, but because the driver's understanding of control had been built on something fragile from the start. When assistance reached its limits, it didn't fade gently or negotiate with physics. It stepped aside abruptly, leaving the driver alone in a moment they had never been prepared to face. This was the moment invincibility shattered. Drivers describe it the same way, regardless of experience. 1 second, everything felt composed, stable, reassuring. The next, the car felt alien, as if its personality had changed without warning. In reality, nothing had changed at all. The systems had simply reached the edge of what they could do, and beyond that edge, the car behaved like any other machine governed by weight, momentum, and friction. But because those realities have been hidden for so long, their return felt shocking, even unfair, as if the car betrayed a promise it never explicitly made. Recovery demanded skills that had never been practiced. Countersteering required instinct instead of confidence. Throttle modulation required restraint instead of belief. Time compressed brutally. Some drivers froze. Others overcorrected. Very few reacted cleanly. Instructors later explained the paradox clearly. The car had made drivers faster before it made them better. And speed without understanding leaves no margin when help disappears. What felt like mastery was often just the absence of resistance. Manufacturers responded defensively at first. They emphasized responsibility. They blamed misuse. They pointed to warnings buried deep in manuals. But privately, a deeper conversation began. Engineers started asking whether performance systems should feel invisible at all, or whether drivers needed to feel intervention in order to learn where limits actually were. Because hiding assistance doesn't remove risk, it postpones it. Later generations of supercars would change approach. Interventions became more noticeable. Feedback became harsher. Systems communicated boundaries instead of disguising them. Those changes weren't about reducing performance. They were about restoring humility. This supercar had shown the industry something critical. That invincibility is not a feature. It is a psychological side effect. And when machines create that feeling without teaching its cost, they don't just amplify speed, they amplify consequences. The question was no longer whether technology could make drivers feel unstoppable. The question was whether it should. And the answer would define everything that came next. What this supercar ultimately revealed wasn't a flaw in engineering, but a flaw in assumption, because it proved that the most powerful influence a machine can have on a human is not speed, but belief. Belief that systems will always intervene. Belief that limits are farther away than they are. Belief that confidence alone is a substitute for discipline. The industry had spent years chasing a single idea, making extreme performance accessible without fear, smoothing danger into something comfortable, controllable, and repeatable. And in doing so, it crossed an invisible line, where safety stopped teaching and started persuading, where protection stopped supporting skill and started replacing it. This car didn't make bad drivers reckless. It made good drivers complacent. By removing friction from the experience, it removed reflection. By correcting errors invisibly, it removed learning. By making speed feel effortless, it removed the emotional signals that once told drivers to pause, reassess, and respect what they were asking the machine. Later designs would course correct quietly. Manufacturers began reintroducing resistance. Assistance systems spoke louder. Feedback became sharper, more honest, less flattering. Not because performance had reached its limit, but because psychology had. This supercar became a reference point inside the industry, a reminder that control is not something a machine can give without consequence. and that confidence delivered too cheaply carries a cost that eventually arrives at full speed. It taught designers that fear, when calibrated correctly, is not the enemy of enjoyment, but the foundation of responsibility. Today's fastest cars are not just quicker, they are clearer. They intervene sooner. They communicate more aggressively. They refuse to let drivers believe they are alone in control when they are not. That shift exists because this car showed what happens when invincibility becomes a product. Because when machines make us feel unstoppable, they also remove the moment where we ask ourselves whether we should continue pushing at all. And sometimes, the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. Why